The first rays of summer sunlight glinted off Lake Willow's pristine surface, casting a golden sheen that masked the brewing tension about to explode across the tranquil community of Lakeview Estates. Michael Rodriguez stood on his dock, carefully, waxing the hull of the Serenity, a meticulously maintained 22-foot chaparral bow rider that had been his pride and joy for the past 5 years. He'd saved for this boat longer than most people kept their first marriage intact. Every weekend, every spare moment was dedicated to maintaining her, transforming her from a distant dream to a tangible symbol of his hard-earned success. The yacht's boat wasn't just a vessel. It was a testament to Michael's journey. From a kid who'd watched his father work multiple jobs to provide for their family, to a successful software engineer who could finally afford his own slice of weekend paradise. But Margaret Thornton, or HOA Karen as the neighborhood had not so affectionately dubbed her, was about to make that paradise a living hell. The Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association was Margaret's personal kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a thin veneer of suburban politeness. 63 years old, recently widowed, and armed with nothing but time and an inexhaustible supply of passive-aggressive energy, Margaret had made it her mission to micromanage every square inch of the community. Michael first noticed her scrutiny during last month's HOA meeting. While discussing routine maintenance and community updates, Margaret's laser-focused gaze kept drifting to him. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped her Mont Blanc pen like a weapon, making notes with the intensity of a prosecutor building a case. "Mr. Rodriguez," she had said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, "I couldn't help but notice some irregularities with your watercraft's positioning." The meeting room had gone silent. Michael knew exactly what was coming. "The bylaws are quite specific about boat placement," Margaret continued, her thin lips forming a smile that never reached her steel-gray eyes. Section 7, paragraph C clearly states that boats must be parked at a precise 45-degree angle to the dock with no more than 6 inches of overhang. Michael had measured his boat's placement meticulously. He knew every inch, every regulation. "My boat is exactly within regulations, Mrs. Thornton," he responded coolly. But Margaret was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, she began a systematic campaign of harassment that would have made most people crumble. Official letters arrived weekly, each more nitpicky than the last. One cited a microscopic paint chip near the boat's registration numbers. Another claimed the boat's cover was inappropriately positioned during non-use hours. What Margaret didn't know was that Michael wasn't just any homeowner. As a former corporate lawyer turned tech entrepreneur, he understood bureaucratic warfare better than most. Each letter she sent was meticulously filed, each claim carefully documented. He knew her game, and he was preparing his counterattack. The community watched with a mixture of fascination and barely concealed amusement. Some neighbors would casually mention the ongoing boat battle during morning walks or weekend barbecues. Michael became something of a local folk hero, the guy standing up to the HOA's most notorious micromanager. But Margaret Thornton was not someone who backed down easily. Her late husband, a retired military colonel, had instilled in her a zero-sum approach to conflict. In her mind, there were only winners and losers, and she was determined to be on the winning side. Little did Michael know that her next move would escalate the conflict from a neighborhood dispute to an all-out war that would reshape the entire community's dynamics. As he finished waxing the Serenity that morning, a certified letter arrived. The crisp white envelope bore the Lakeview Estates HOA letterhead, and Michael could feel the weight of potential conflict in his hands. He took a deep breath, broke the seal, and began to read. The first sentence alone was enough to make his blood pressure rise. Notice of proposed boat restriction and potential community ordinance amendment. Margaret Thornton had just declared war, and Michael Rodriguez was more than ready to fight back. The HOA meeting room buzzed with an electric tension Michael had never experienced before. 57 homeowners packed the community center's largest conference room, their murmurs creating a low, anticipatory hum. At the front of the room, Margaret Thornton sat ramrod straight, her meticulously pressed lavender blazer a stark contrast to the storm brewing around her. Michael's file folder was thick, a comprehensive documentation of every interaction, every letter, every regulation. He'd spent weeks preparing, consulting with former colleagues in law, and gathering support from fellow homeowners who had long suffered under Margaret's tyrannical HOA reign. The proposed amendment, Margaret began, her voice cutting through the room like a knife, seeks to implement strict watercraft regulations that will maintain the aesthetic and safety standards of Lakeview Estates. What she didn't know was that Michael had been quietly gathering evidence, not just of her harassment, but of multiple ethical breaches in her management of the HOA. Financial discrepancies, selective enforcement of rules, repeated violations of fair housing guidelines. As Margaret droned on about boat sizes, dock placements, and aesthetic concerns, Michael noticed something changing in the room. Neighbors, who had previously remained silent, were now exchanging knowing glances. The tide was turning. When it was his turn to speak, Michael didn't just defend himself. He systematically dismantled Margaret's proposal, using her own bylaws against her. He presented a detailed analysis showing how her proposed restrictions would actually decrease property values, violate existing maritime regulations, and potentially open the HOA to significant legal liability. Mrs. Thornton claims this is about maintaining community standards, Michael said, his voice calm and measured. But the real issue is control. Control that has become increasingly arbitrary and discriminatory. Then came the moment that would define the entire conflict. Michael produced bank statements, HOA meeting minutes, and correspondence that revealed Margaret had been using HOA funds for personal expenses. A $500 repair to her personal dock. Reimbursements for community events that never happened. Contracts awarded to her nephew's landscaping business without proper bidding. The room went silent. Margaret's perfectly composed facade began to crack. Her steel gray eyes widened, then narrowed. Her manicured hand gripped the podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This is slander," she stammered, but her voice lacked its previous conviction. The HOA president, a retired judge named Robert Coleman, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thornton, these appear to be official documents. Perhaps you'd like to explain?" What followed was a masterclass in professional dismantling. Michael didn't just defend his boat. He exposed a pattern of abuse that had gone unchecked for years. Homeowners who had previously feared Margaret now found their voices. Story after story emerged of petty vindictiveness, selective rule enforcement, and financial impropriety. By the meeting's end, Margaret had been not just defeated, but thoroughly discredited. The HOA board voted unanimously to reject her proposed boat restrictions and launched a formal investigation into her financial management. But Michael wasn't done. In the weeks that followed, he worked with the HOA board to implement transparent governance policies, term limits for board members, mandatory financial audits, open meetings with full documentation. The final blow came when the board voted to remove Margaret from her long-held position, citing multiple ethical violations. As for the lake, it remained a community treasure, with boats of all sizes welcomed, including Michael's beloved Serenity. At the next community barbecue, neighbors approached Michael, thanking him for standing up to Margaret's years of bullying. But for Michael, it was never about personal victory. It was about protecting the community he loved. Margaret Thornton moved away shortly after, her reputation in Lakeview Estates reduced to a cautionary tale of what happens when power goes unchecked. The lake sparkled that summer, brighter, it seemed, than ever before.